Have you ever really thought about how a story survives? I mean, not just for a few years, but for over 400 years. How does a play that was first performed in the noise and chaos of a London theater in the 1600s end up in a book, in a completely different language, right here in our hands today? Well, let's trace that incredible journey together.
This quote, this really powerful idea, comes from the preface to a 1941 Turkish translation of Shakespeare. And the point it's making is huge. It's saying this isn't just about reading some old classic. It's about how translating these great works is absolutely essential to a nation's culture. It's about building a grand library for the mind.
So, okay, let's unpack that. What does it actually mean to build a nation's grand library? And why is translating a 400-year-old play so important in that whole process?
The core idea here is that translation isn't just some mechanical word-for-word swap. It's a deeply creative act. A nation isn't just copying Shakespeare, it's absorbing him, arguing with him, and making his stories part of its own cultural conversation. And in doing that, it actually deepens its own understanding of the world. Okay, so from that big, grand idea of how culture gets passed on, let's zoom all the way back to the beginning, to the source of the words themselves. Let's meet the man, the myth, the legend, William Shakespeare. And here he is. You know, the funny thing is, what we know about him doesn't come from personal diaries or angsty letters. It comes from official records. We're talking church registers, court documents, property deeds. He was the son of a pretty well-off tradesman who was even the local mayor. So a man of substance, for sure, but he wasn't, part of the high and mighty aristocracy. And his life was honestly surprisingly practical. You gotta forget that image of the starving artist in some freezing attic. Shakespeare was an actor, a writer, a shareholder in his theater company, and, get this, a really savvy businessman who invested all his earnings in real estate back home. He came to London to make a living, and boy, did he succeed. So now let's step into his world, the place where these plays actually came to life. And I need you to just erase any picture you have of a quiet, polite, stuffy theater. Because Elizabethan London, whoa, that was a whole different beast. 15,000. Let that number sink in. That's how many people, it's estimated, went to the theater in London every single week. This wasn't some niche, artsy thing for the elite. No way. This was the blockbuster cinema of its day. This was mass entertainment for everyone. And the stage itself? Well, look at it. It was basically a bare, open platform that jutted right out into the middle of the audience. There was no fancy curtain going up and down, no elaborate sets being wheeled on and off. The words, the poetry, that had to do all the heavy lifting, creating entire worlds right there in the audience's imagination. And the audience? Oh, they were not sitting there in hushed, reverent silence. The folks with the cheap tickets, the groundlings, they stood in an open yard right in front of the stage, and they were eating, drinking, and yelling at the actors. If it rained, they got soaked. It was loud, it was interactive, and it was kinda chaotic. A little different from today, huh? And here is this amazing, tangible little detail that connects the centuries. When they rebuilt the Globe Theatre in London, research showed that the original floor was covered in hazelnut shells. So to recreate it authentically, they shipped 7.5 tons of shells all the way from Jersey, Turkey. It's just a perfect, unexpected link between Shakespeare's world and a culture that would one day translate his work. Okay, so the plays were a massive hit. But how in the world did they get from that rowdy, noisy stage onto a printed page that we can read today? Well, that journey was, believe it or not, incredibly risky. Now, to understand what happened next, you just need to know two key terms. The plays were printed in two basic formats. First, you had quartos. Think of these as the cheap, flimsy paperbacks of their day, small booklets with just one play. And then you had the folios. These were the big, fancy, expensive hardcovers, large, high-quality collections of multiple plays. Now here's the crucial part. Once Shakespeare wrote a play, it wasn't really his anymore. It belonged to his acting company. And there was no such thing as modern copyright. The companies definitely didn't want their popular plays printed because then rival groups could steal them. This whole situation created a kind of literary Wild West, full of piracy. So this led to two different kinds of printed texts. The good quartos were probably based on a stolen or maybe a leaked official script. But then you had the bad quartos, And these were often put together by actors who would literally try to reconstruct an entire play from memory and then go sell it to a shady publisher. I mean, can you imagine? They were, as you'd expect, just filled with errors and paraphrasing.
All of this chaos and piracy leads us to this, the single most important book in English literature, the First Folio. 7 years after Shakespeare died, 2 of his friends and fellow actors gathered all his plays together to create one big, authoritative edition. And thank goodness they did. Without this one book, about half of his plays, including Macbeth, Twelfth Night, and the one we're looking at, Antony and Cleopatra, would have just been lost to time, forever.
So now let's zoom all the way in and see how all of this, the history, the stage, the text, it all comes together in the play that this book is all about, Antony and Cleopatra. On the surface, the play is this epic, doomed love story between the Roman general Mark Antony and the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. But it's so much more than that. It is really about the massive collision of 2 completely opposite worlds that these 2 lovers represent. On one side, you have Rome. It's cold, logical, masculine. It's a world of duty, politics, and building an empire. And on the other side, you have Egypt. It's all passion, emotion, and opulence. It's a world of love and indulgence. Antony is a Roman to his core, but his heart is in Egypt. And it's this fundamental conflict that just tears his entire world apart.
And the result of that conflict is what many critics think is one of his absolute greatest achievements. The critic G. Wilson Knight famously called it Shakespeare's Everest, the absolute peak of his artistic power. The poetry is just breathtaking, the characters are unforgettable, and the scale of it is truly epic.
So we come full circle. From a noisy stage in London, through pirated copies and a legendary book, across 400 years and over language barrier, to find a new life in a nation's grand library. It just makes you wonder, right? What is it in these words, in these stories of love and duty and power, that gives them the strength to survive a journey like that? What makes a story truly timeless?